Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for making for this session. Data centers have been quite topical in the last 2 days, and I'm delighted to have industry experts with me on stage to talk about data centers in East Africa. Kicking us off, we have Faith. Faith, tell us about your projections on the data center growth within the next few years.
Thank you, Mbida. I did a lot of research on this question because I've been building data centers for over a decade, and I wanted to see what the internet and AI said. So the internet said we would have somewhere between 12 and 17% growth. It said we would be sitting at about $10 billion in Africa in terms of projected growth. And it also said we would be sitting at 1.43 thousand megawatts. Now, the moment I saw 1.43 thousand, I knew this wasn't written by someone who's in the data center industry, because they would have easily jumped to gigawatts, true? So being in the data center industry and having worked there, the projections in the industry are that we'll be sitting at about 1.6 gigawatt in the data center industry by 2030. But these are traditional data centers. So I'll go back knowing that a lot of the people in the room are either in construction or real estate. I'll just take a minute to explain data centers. What are data centers? So the guys who are here were talking about real estate, luxury real estate. A data center is real estate. It's simply a building. But instead of housing human beings, we house computers. Those computers sit in racks. Simple. That's the essence of a data center. The same way in this room there's AC running, the computers need to be at a certain temperature, so we have cooling, we have a high power demand. So when we're looking at that growth projection, what I'm seeing is that all the projections we have today, unless we have someone who has a magic ball, none of them will be accurate in 2030. Why do I say that? Today, in conventional data centers, in the last decade, we've seen a move from building server rooms where a rack used to do 3 kilowatts. Most of the banks here are doing 3 kilowatts per rack. We went to 10 kilowatts per rack. As we speak, AI is doing 135 kilowatts per rack. And at Schneider Electric, we actually have one running that we can show you physically. So that's a 1,000% jump. So where you were doing 100 racks to get to 1 megawatt, you now need 10 racks. 10 racks is this space, guy? You run a data center? So you're moving from running 1 acre of space at 1 megawatt to running what square feet in 1 megawatt. So the AI jump, and as we test that 135 kilowatt, we have NVIDIA telling us they are doing 600 kilowatt per rack. So for me, I would say on traditional data centers, I do anticipate that we will reach the 1.6 gigawatt level. But when it comes to AI, we'll see dynamics change. And I will allow the rest of the panelists to speak about Africa, because with the changes we're seeing in Africa, with the power we have, with the user demand, we will see AI cause that jump to be higher than we anticipated.
Thanks, Faith. And Osvaldo, maybe you can tell us about what you think regulation impact will be on the growth that's projected.
Oh, okay. I have been to several trade shows, and I hear in the panels one big challenge is regulations. And I found that to be overblown, because we know for a fact that the US and Europe has much more regulations than in Africa. So it's very simple. The Kenya Information and Communications Act 2 of 1998 is the framework that guides all technology in Kenya. But in the past 30 years, lots of new technologies came to Africa, and they were incorporated by the Communications Authority of Kenya, which has the mandate to implement the regulations. And we had GSM, came, cable TV, Zuku, and we have 3G, submarine cables, and you have 4G, metro networks, and now data center, so which is already here for 10 years, and we have gone from enterprise data centers to edge data centers, and then we have data centers what the guy has that's the biggest capacity in Kenya. So if we say that hyperscalers or AI data centers of high consumption, like Faye say, that is business as usual. So I don't see that as a challenge. Is difficult, yes, otherwise everybody will be doing. But is a challenge that has been overblown.
That's good to know. And Guy, what do you think that the government will do to drive the growth within East Africa?
I mean, in any market, it's really important to build that whole data center ecosystem up. A country without data centers is not really a country. It's like, imagine if you had to drive 8 hours across the border to take a plane because there are no airports in your country. Well, it's the same. Data centers are the airports of the internet. And as much as Faith was talking about the power and the energy, data centers are marketplaces where you build ecosystems and everybody interconnects. So you might get a bank connecting to Visa and MasterCard and Refinitiv and Bloomberg, and maybe a compliance cloud company, and then maybe on-ramping with Microsoft. So you've got these whole communities of digital economy that are building up. That's just finance, and you've got gaming, and you've got pharmaceutical and distribution, etc. So what is most important is to encourage investment in this space, and governments that encourage it, they win, and their communications ministers become heroes because they actually open the country up to the international market. The one fantastic thing about Kenya is the deregulation of telecoms. There's lots of fiber around. There's no good putting your computer in a building if it costs you thousands and thousands of dollars to move your data out of it. You might as well keep your data in Frankfurt and send it down, remote. So telecoms is really important. These are massive investments. These are absolutely massive investments, just absolute, very simple rule of thumb. We're all talking about megawatts here, and I'm sure half people here think, what is he talking about? But data centers, in our funny little world of data centers, we measure them in megawatts. 1 megawatt of data centers about anything between $10 and $20 million. So if you're building 100 megawatts, that's a big chunk of change. That is not something that government should be investing in. And governments are typically very, very unsuccessful in investing in any infrastructure in general directly. It's much better if you've got private companies. The data center market's a bit like telecoms in the sense that it's very important to have multiple providers because there's so much money to be invested in infrastructure. It's better to have 3, 4, 5 players than one dominant player. And we see that around the world. So I guess the short answer is get involved as least as you can, and also potentially start looking at tax incentives for the clients who are the Kenyan IT companies hustling, trying to build their IT systems, give them duty-free import of all their servers. That's really going to boost the economy.
Guy, you've touched on the investments required for the growth and development of data centers in East Africa. And I'll move over to you, Ian. What do you think will drive investor demand into East Africa?
Thank you. And before Oswaldo talks me out of a job, let me just highlight some of the key ingredients, in my view, to creating the right framework for data center investments. I think the golden rule is that capital follows clarity. Where there's clarity, where there's certainty, the investment will come. And so just briefly touching on some of the points that Guy has mentioned around what are some of the initiatives that governments in the region are doing to be proper enablers of investment in data centers in the region. So what have we seen in the region? We've seen increased investment in government themselves looking to do digital transformation of their own services and also to enable digital transformation of entire economies. We are seeing that drive in Kenya, we are seeing that drive in Zambia, in Rwanda, in Uganda, across the piece. And the beauty is we are not just seeing policy statements. We are seeing a lot of intentionality on the part of the public sector to put money and to put initiative and action behind those policy statements. And we think that with that, as our economy is transformed to be more digitized, that can only spur the growth of data center services and data center demand. The other thing that we are seeing is that some of the historical barriers to investment are coming down. When you think of historical restrictions on shareholding requirements or local shareholding requirements, those have come down in many jurisdictions. I appreciate there are some jurisdictions where there's still a challenge, for example in Tanzania, but the opportunity is there now even for foreign capital to participate at a much greater level than perhaps was the case before. Then thirdly is around these 1.6 gigawatts that if we use that as a baseline that Faith mentioned, that's a lot of energy demand. So the key question for me is always, how are we going to power these data centers? And what have we seen in the region over the last 2 decades or so? There's been significant investment by governments along with private sector participants in renewable power generation. And if you look at our grid, for example, in Kenya, it is currently at over 80% green, renewable energy sources, mainly solar, wind, and geothermal. Same case in Uganda and Tanzania, although for them it's mostly hydro. The challenge, though, with renewable energy is that it's often intermittent, and data centers want reliable baseload power, not intermittent supply of power. So whilst we do have a lot of renewable energy in the region, we still have a challenge now with the intermittent nature of that supply. And so some of the conversations we are frequently having with governments, with regulators now, are around how do we create more baseload renewable power, either through exploiting the geothermal resources that we have in the Rift Valley, in the region, or thinking around things such as battery energy storage systems for new power supply into the national grid, which can then create that opportunity for more investment in data centers with more reliable power supply. So I'll stop here for now and I can pick up later. Thanks.
Thanks. I'm going to switch the question a little bit and speak on AI. What role will AI play in the growth of data centers in East Africa? And that's to Osvaldo.
Well, if you remember before, and I'm from Brazil, so I could see that when Napsters came, it's not available in your country. So that is 23, 24 years ago. And because I have been a long time in Africa, you could see things happening in Japan, South Korea, USA, Europe, and it was not available in the developing countries. But the internet changed all that, so now it's instantaneous. Whatever happens there, it will be happening here at the same time, because companies strive for market share. So, and say Facebook stock price was directly, when they are growing, was directly correlated with the number of users. So Africa has big number of users. So AI is not going to be different. The services will be available in Africa as at the same time that's going to happen everywhere. But there will be an impact in the digital infrastructure because this is over and above the workloads that a data center have today. And they have to be brought close to where we are, like Netflix has the content distribution networks here because you cannot fetch the data from the US or Europe or Dubai. So it has an impact, but the infrastructure is going to be more of the same. Service-wise, whatever happened there, you'll be happening here at the same time.
Guy, could you tell us what challenges you see that are impacting the sector? We've spoken about regulation. What other things are we seeing, and how would that be mitigated?
A lot of the challenges are outside, actually. I mean, we're talking about AI. You know, Osvaldo and I are not 25 years old anymore. So we both remember the dot-com bubble, where everybody was excited and throwing money at companies, and they lost everything. The AI revolution is a bit like that at the moment. It's kind of, I need AI. I'm not quite sure what it's about, but it's something really good. It's like vitamins in cornflakes or something. And so what is happening in the US is massive investment in data centers in the US. The US Department of Defense is basically not allowing LLM, large language modeling, outside the US of any scale to any country, including Canada, UK, or wherever. So it's all happening in the US. And at the moment around the world, that explosion in the US and to a certain extent in Southeast Asia at the moment is meaning that there's less focus on Europe and even less focus on Africa. And so that's kind of slowed the system down a little bit. So I guess that's one of our challenges at the moment. Now what is likely to happen is that will change as the development of AI starts rolling out across the world, as everybody bolts on a bit of AI onto their cloud offerings, and as some of these major international companies start looking for growth, and obviously Africa is the growth place. I mean, Human earlier said three very interesting things when he was talking about real estate. He was saying, number one, the real estate has to be interesting for buyers. Well, it's the same thing for data centers. If we've created a marketplace to distribute content and to interconnect with people, that's really important. They'll come. Second thing he mentioned was about the brand. You don't bring your super expensive equipment into a data center that you don't know, or people you don't know who've not operated one before. That's a massive risk. And the third thing he said was that Nairobi's becoming a little bit of a Dubai for the region. And that might be realistic in terms of residential real estate, but it's also realistic in terms of the information economy. So I say the only problem we got now is everybody's sort of focusing on the US, but I think that's probably going to change in the next 18 months.
Faith, anything to add?
So I'll take the second thing he said, the brand, and I'll speak on a challenge that's close to my heart. So having worked in the data center industry for a long time in Africa, Kenya, East Africa, Anglophone Africa, one of my biggest challenges is skill set. You and I know, and everyone sitting on this panel, that when it comes to data centers, when it comes to the power, when it comes to the mechanical, plumbing, cooling, chillers, everything, we as Africa have not built the skill set. We've tried to, but we're not doing enough of it. So you'll either find when it comes to the workforce, they're moving between facilities, or most of the time we're shipping in experts from abroad. But that can't continue to happen if the growth is to happen. Otherwise we'll have the chicken and egg story. We have the investment, but we don't have the people to build the investment. So mine would be for every facility that we have, for the different investors, for the different companies sitting in this room, to really consider the challenge of skill set and how each and every organization can bridge that gap locally as well as in Africa as a whole.
I just add to that that I think it's a really important point. When we built our data center on the Nairobi-Mombasa Road, they were all Kenyan contractors. So we didn't need to bring in the expats, but as Faye said, that those same teams are going to have to hop between. That's quite unusual in Africa in general, to be able to just rely on local contractors right the way up to 11 kilovolt lines and massive generators and everything else like that, all done, set up locally. And therefore, turning it into a positive, that's a fantastic base to build a whole skill set to move right the way across the continent from Nairobi, I think.
And that's why I said it's close to my heart, because as Schneider Electric, we purposely tried to build that skill set, and we were able to do it in the hubs. But when we go to other parts of Africa, we are having to ship those people to Uganda, to Tanzania, and everywhere else. So mine, as Faith and heading that data center segment, is to purposely build even in those regions, and with your help, the organization sitting in this room, to actually make it happen.
Like Guy said, I'm no longer 21 years old. When there was this big wireless build out, starting in the 90s, when it came to the developing world, now called emerging markets, they bring a Boeing 747 full of engineers, technicians, managers, and a truckload of equipment. And if you cut for the half of that build out, when came 3G around the 2010, 2008, 2010, the local people were already doing, because they developed subcontractors and small shops that they specialized, and those big contracting companies, they left and left an offshoot in Africa. So the message is learning by doing. The more data centers we have coming in, the more the boys will go to that, because they leave university and say, I want to go to the data center, the same way that they wanted to go by microwave in my time, and the same way that they wanted to work for Nokia and Ericsson. So it is good to bring, it creates the challenge to build that workforce, and those guys who run away for a better job somewhere else. But the more opportunities you have, the more that number of skill sets will be available. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Lastly, I'll ask, and I'll start with Ian. Just yes or no. Yes or no, no explanation, nothing. Do you believe that the growth in Africa data market will double by 2030?
Being the lawyer I am, I have to say it depends. And it depends on what we do around the power. Right now in this country, at peak time, we have 0 reserves of power. If we are talking about bringing hyperscale data centers to this country today, we cannot, simply because the power is not available at the scale they need it. And therefore, we have to solve the power generation and transmission opportunity first in order to attract the hyperscalers.
Yeah, and that touches on my last question about challenges. Spoken on it, thanks. Yes or no, Osvaldo? Doubling in 2030, Africa.
Yeah. Kenya has a power hub up in Suswa, and it's connected to the so-called East African power pool. So the Tanzania down to Arusha, to Tororo in Uganda, to Ethiopia, and it will connect all the power sources of Kenya. Nearby in the Rift Valley, you have the geothermal power park. Is the 6th big in the world now, and they keep expanding to Menegai and some other places in the neighborhood. And to raise the capital to build the green energy is not a problem. The Germans, the Italians, the Japanese, the South Koreans like the projects. And we have an HVDC, high voltage direct current to Renaissance Dam for 2,000 megawatt that's being used today for 100. So it's kind of push and pull. If the data centers arrive